My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 37 years old. On the night of Tuesday, the 14th of October, I was lying in bed 11 of the recovery wing at Coastal Memorial Hospital in Savannah, Georgia, with an IV line taped into the crook of my left arm and a blood pressure cuff cycling around my right every 30 minutes with a hiss and a squeeze that had long since stopped startling me, and my husband called me from our house on Habersham Street, 12 miles across the city, to tell me that he was worried sick. He said he had barely been able to eat. He said the house felt enormous and wrong without me in it. He said he had spent the whole evening walking from room to room turning lights off because he couldn't make himself sit still. He said he was about to make some eggs and try to get to bed early because he had a 7:30 site meeting in the morning, and before he hung up he said, very quietly, "I love you. Please rest. I'll be there first thing." I said, "I love you too." I hung up the phone. I set it face up on the hospital blanket beside my right hip. Then I opened the Arlo application on my home screen. The motion alerts had started at 7:43 in the evening. 4 cameras, 9 clips. A car I had never seen before. A silver 4-door sedan. Parked in our driveway for 3 hours and 24 minutes. A woman walking through our front door behind my husband's shoulder. Marcus at the kitchen counter lifting 2 glasses from the cabinet I had asked him not to use, and pouring from the bottle of Barolo we had opened together 2 Fridays earlier and left half unfinished, because we had argued about something I can no longer remember and gone to bed without finishing it. What they did not know was that 21 days before that night, on the 23rd of September, I had replaced every camera in that house with Arlo Ultra 4K models equipped with wide-angle lenses, 2-way audio capture, and continuous cloud backup to a private server account registered to my business email address, an account they had no login for, no knowledge of, and no way to access even if they had known to look. I had paid for every piece of equipment in cash. I had said nothing about it to anyone. This is that story. I want to go back to where this actually begins. Not the dramatic beginning, the real one, because the real beginning has nothing to do with cameras or hospital beds or October. It begins 11 years ago in a lecture hall in Charleston, South Carolina, on a Tuesday afternoon at a municipal infrastructure conference, where I was sitting in the 3rd row with a yellow legal pad balanced on my knee, a pen tucked behind my right ear, and a very clear sense of the life I was methodically building toward. My name was Clara Ingram then. I was 26 years old. I had completed my professional certification in interior design the previous year and had been working for 2 years under a senior designer named Ruth Halloran, assembling a client list and a portfolio and the kind of slow, layered professional foundation that serious work always requires, and that nobody outside the field ever quite sees happening. I sat in that 3rd row because I have always preferred the 3rd row, close enough to hear clearly, far enough back to watch the room. Marcus Allen Whitmore sat down beside me during the lunch break between sessions and said, nodding at my legal pad, "Nobody under 50 uses those anymore." I told him I was perfectly aware of that. He laughed. I did not. He was 30 years old, dark-haired, lean, presenting a paper that afternoon on municipal stormwater management planning, which I will acknowledge sounds like it should be the least interesting subject in the English language, and which he made genuinely compelling through sheer specificity and a voice that was calm in a way I found immediately credible. He asked for my number. I gave it to him. We had dinner 2 weeks later at a small place in the French Quarter of Charleston and talked for 4 hours without effort. I was, for the first time in my adult life, surprised by another person. It was an unfamiliar feeling and I liked it more than I expected. We married 3 years later on a Saturday afternoon in late April in Forsyth Park. The wisteria was at its fullest along the wrought iron fence, and the light was the deep honey gold of a Savannah spring, and 114 guests came, including my mother Sandra flying in from Portland, Oregon, and Marcus's parents Douglas and Nora driving down from Raleigh. The ceremony was 22 minutes long. We had written our own vows, which I had revised 4 times because I take language seriously and I wanted to say only what I could stand behind completely. The reception lasted until midnight. We danced to a song we had argued about for 6 weeks, and when the night was over I stood in the bathroom of our suite at the Marshall House, with my dress half unzipped and my hair coming loose from its pins, and I looked at my own reflection and felt the specific, quiet satisfaction of a woman who has made a deliberate choice and knows it. I remember the feeling because it was the last time in my marriage that I felt entirely, uncomplicated, sure of everything. We bought the house on Habersham Street that same spring. A 4-bedroom Victorian with 11-foot ceilings, original horsehair plaster medallions centered above every principal room, gas lanterns on either side of the front entrance, a mahogany staircase with original balusters, and a mature wisteria-covered pergola in the back garden that I had begun sketching a redesign for before we had even closed. We paid $642,000. Marcus had found the listing. Marcus had negotiated the terms. Marcus managed the household accounts, paid the mortgage, and maintained the joint checking account from which I drew a monthly household allocation for groceries, utilities, home maintenance, and what he had from the beginning of our marriage referred to as personal expenses. I had not challenged this arrangement in the early years of our marriage because I was building my freelance practice and my income was variable, and the allocation was sufficient for what we had. Agreed I would cover. I was focused entirely on the work. I should be precise about what that work actually was. Because this is where the first hairline fracture appeared in the structure of our marriage, and I want to name the location exactly. I am an interior designer, not decorating. Design, spatial planning, material specification, lighting architecture, contractor and vendor coordination, client relationship management, and the kind of detailed project oversight that runs from initial concept through final punch list and requires a specific combination of technical knowledge, organizational precision, and the ability to hold 15 competing priorities in your head simultaneously while appearing perfectly calm to your client. I have held my professional certification from the American Society of Interior Designers since I was 25 years old. I have won 3 regional design awards, including a citation from the Southeastern Interiors Council in the year I was 32. Between the April of our wedding year and the October of this story, I had billed $127,000 of work entirely under my own name, while simultaneously cultivating a referral network that included 3 prominent Savannah architects, 2 historic preservation groups, and a hotel development firm whose regional director had told me once, at an industry dinner, that my name was the first he mentioned whenever anyone on his team asked who to trust with a significant interior project. I had done all of this while running my household, managing our social calendar, maintaining the property on Habersham Street that we both lived in and that I alone had designed every room of, and being what Marcus described, at dinner parties and neighborhood gatherings and firm events, as the person who handled Clara's decorating thing. Clara's decorating thing. That was the phrase. He used it with warmth, as though warmth neutralized what it was. He used it to his colleagues at Southern Tier Associates, to our neighbors on the block, to his parents, to people we met at events. Clara's decorating thing keeps her busy. As if I were potting begonias on a sun porch. As if the $48,000 contract I was managing with the Harrington Hotel Group, a project that required me to coordinate across 6 contractors, 2 permitting offices, a lighting consultant, and a custom furniture workshop in High Point, North Carolina, was a pleasant hobby. As if the reason 3 separate architects called me specifically when recommending designers to their clients was a mild coincidence rather than the direct result of 8 years of work I had done, while he called it puttering. The first time I recognized the full shape of this pattern was February of the 3rd year of our marriage. I came home and told Marcus over dinner that I had landed the Harrington contract. I watched him put his fork down and chew what was in his mouth, slowly and completely before he spoke. He said, "That's a significant scope for a solo freelancer. Hotel groups can turn on you very fast when scope changes. Do you have enough support structure in place?" I told him I had reviewed the contract in detail with an attorney. He said, "Which attorney?" I said, "Patricia Chang, a woman I had worked with on 2 previous projects." He made a sound, not a word, a brief nasal sound that was his specific register of politely concealed skepticism. The sound he made when he had decided something and found it unnecessary to say it out loud because he believed the outcome would prove him right. He never mentioned the Harrington Hotel project again, not when I won the Regional Design Award for it, not when the client extended my contract into a second phase and wrote me a letter of reference that I still have in a folder at my studio, not once in the 8 years that followed. The second time I saw it clearly was a Sunday afternoon in the 5th year of our marriage. Douglas and Nora were visiting from Raleigh, and we were having a long, slow lunch on the back pergola. The kind of July afternoon where the food runs out and the ice melts in the tea and nobody moves because the garden is exactly right and the conversation has no reason to end. Nora asked me how things were going professionally. I had drawn breath to answer when Marcus said, pleasantly and without the slightest hesitation, "Oh, you know Clara. She loves to putter." Douglas laughed. Nora smiled and reached for her iced tea. I ate a piece of tomato from my plate and said nothing. But I stored it the way I had been storing everything. I added it to the mental file I had been quietly keeping for observations that had not yet found their full context. That file was getting thick. The third thing was a name. Sasha Reeves. She worked in the Stakeholder Engagement and Communications Division at Southern Tier Associates. She was 32 years old, auburn-haired, with the specific social fluency of a person who adjusts the temperature of a room when she enters it without appearing to try. I had met her at Marcus's firm holiday party in December of the year before the story begins. Marcus had introduced her that evening as one of the sharpest people on the floor. A phrase he had used about a colleague in front of me, exactly once in 8 years of marriage, and which I noted with the same quiet attention I brought to everything. Between January and the following April, her name came up in Marcus's incidental conversation on 11 separate occasions. Always explained, always contextualized. A shared stakeholder brief, a presentation coordination, a client lunch she had helped organize. Always delivered in the smooth, unhurried register of a man who has rehearsed the casualness until it no longer sounds rehearsed. 11 times in 4 months. I tracked it the way I tracked project timelines because I track everything and because a pattern only becomes legible when you've been patient enough to count. I had no evidence. I had a pattern. A pattern without documentation is not actionable anywhere that matters. So I waited, and I watched, and I kept quiet. This has always been the part of me that Marcus most fundamentally underestimated. He believed my stillness was passivity. He believed my composure meant I was not paying attention. He could not have been more precisely wrong on both counts. Over the summer and into early September, I researched home security systems with the same methodical care I brought to any project specification. We had a basic 4-camera setup already, installed 3 years earlier after a neighbor's car was stolen from the block below us on Jones Street. Entry points only. Standard cloud storage for 30 days. Marcus had agreed to the installation without any particular interest and had never mentioned it again. On the 23rd of September, while Marcus was in Charlotte for a 3-day client conference, I drove to an electronics retailer on Abercorn Street. I spent $2,160 in cash on 6 Arlo Ultra 4K cameras with wide-angle lenses, two-way audio, and continuous cloud backup. I registered the cloud account to my business email, Clara Whitmore Interiors, a domain Marcus knew existed but whose login and server credentials had never once been discussed between us. The installation technician came the following morning. I directed him to position 4 interior cameras, in addition to the 2 external units, one in the kitchen, angled to cover the full counter and island, one in the living room covering both the sofa group and the doorway, one in the upper hallway outside the primary bedroom, and one in the entrance foyer covering the front door and the stairs. Full interior coverage. Not the entry point safety setup Marcus knew about. Something considerably more thorough. When Marcus came home from Charlotte 2 evenings later, I told him I had upgraded the old cameras to better models. He said, "Good idea," without looking up from the mail he had picked off the front table. He did not ask which brand. He did not ask where the footage was stored, or how the cloud access worked, or whether the login had changed. He poured himself a glass of water and took the mail to his office and closed the door. I stood in the kitchen and I thought, and there it is. 3 weeks later, on the morning of Tuesday the 14th of October, I woke at 3:17 with a pain in my lower right abdomen that I dismissed, for the first half hour, as a muscle cramp. By 5 it had sharpened and moved. By 7:19 I was in the passenger seat of Marcus's car. Door barely closed. Being driven to the emergency room at Coastal Memorial. He gripped the wheel with both hands the whole way. He asked twice if he needed to pull over. I told him both times to keep driving. Dr. Anita Howell assessed me within 40 minutes of arrival and confirmed appendicitis. She was direct and precise and unhurried in the specific way of surgeons who have done this many times and have learned that clarity is kinder than softening. She scheduled the appendectomy for 3:45 that afternoon. I went into the operating room with a clear head and came out of anesthesia at approximately 6 in the evening feeling like someone had rearranged my interior geography while I was unconscious, which is more or less an accurate description of what had happened. Marcus sat with me in recovery through most of the first hour after I woke. He held my hand. He asked the nursing staff questions about recovery timelines and post-surgical care in the precise, organized way he brought to any situation where he was managing information in front of an audience. At 6:59, he said he was going to head home, get some rest, be back first thing in the morning before his meeting if he could manage it. He said he was going to make eggs and watch something quiet on television and turn in early. He said the house would feel enormous without me in it. He kissed my forehead. He told me not to worry about anything at all. He was through the door of room 11 at 7:22 in the evening. The first motion alert arrived at 7:43. I want to say something carefully before I describe what I found, because I know what the shape of this story looks like from outside it. I know it sounds like a woman lying in a hospital bed checking cameras she installed specifically because she suspected something. I need you to understand that I was not looking for anything that night. I was lying in room 11 with a catheter and an IV drip and a recovering incision and a blood pressure cuff that woke me every 30 minutes, and my phone lit up on the blanket beside me because it was configured to send motion alerts, the way it had been configured to send motion alerts every day since September the 23rd, and I looked at the notification because the notification was there. I am a thorough person. Thorough people look at the information that appears in front of them. That distinction matters to me. The first clip was 26 seconds long. It showed my front door opening at 7:43 in the evening. It showed Marcus stepping back and holding it open from the inside. It showed Sasha Reeves walking through the doorway in a camel-colored wool coat I had seen hanging in the coat closet of his office. The one time I had brought him lunch there in the spring. She carried a bottle of red wine in the crook of her left arm. Marcus let the door swing closed and placed his hand, briefly and with complete naturalness, on the small of her back as she moved past him into the hallway. This was not the gesture of a man who was doing this for the first time. There was no hesitation in it. It was the gesture of a man who was home. I watched that clip twice. I set the phone on the blanket. I looked at the ceiling of room 11. I counted the acoustic tiles, 42 of them. Then I picked the phone back up and I watched every remaining clip. The kitchen footage at 7:51 showed Marcus opening the cabinet on the left side of the range, the cabinet I had specifically asked him twice not to use because the upper shelf was warping from ambient moisture and the glasses slid toward the front edge if you weren't careful. He had been dismissive both times I'd raised it. He opened that cabinet for her without a moment's hesitation and lifted out 2 of our best wine glasses. He poured from the bottle of Varolo we had opened together 2 Fridays before the surgery. A Friday evening that had ended early because we had argued about something I can no longer specify and gone to bed without finishing the wine or the conversation. He was pouring the rest of that bottle for someone else in my kitchen, while I was in a hospital bed 12 miles away. The two-way audio on the Arlo Ultra is not cinematic quality, but it is functional. I heard his laugh. The warm, rounded version. The one he deployed in rooms where he wanted to be liked and was working at it. I had not heard that laugh directed at me in several months. I heard him say, clearly enough to follow, "She's not supposed to be back until Thursday. At the earliest." There was a pause. Then lighter, honestly, maybe longer. I heard Sasha's response, something lower that I could not fully distinguish, and then her laughter. And then the specific quiet that settles between two people who are comfortable with each other, who have been comfortable for a while, who are comfortable in a house that belongs to someone who is not present. The living room footage from 8:19 onward showed them on the sofa. Settled, her legs folded under her, the unhurried, easeful body language of two people who have been in this configuration before. I watched that clip for a while. Then I closed the application. I did not open the upper hallway footage. I did not open the final clips. I did not need to. Marcus called me at 9:47 in the evening. His voice had that quality he could produce on request. Warm, slightly muted, the voice of a man at home alone in a quiet house with nothing particular on his mind. He said he hadn't been able to settle. He said he kept checking his phone hoping for a nursing update. He said the eggs had been terrible and he was about to try to sleep. He said, "I love you. Please rest." I said, "I love you too." I said nothing else. I set the phone face down on the blanket and I lay in the dark of room 11 with the cardiac monitor counting out its steady rhythm beside me. And I felt something happen that I have thought about many times since that night. It was not rage. It was not the specific flavor of grief I might have expected from a moment like this. It was something colder and considerably more useful. It was the feeling I know from the very first day of a complex project, when the full scope of the problem clarifies completely, and the confusion lifts and what remains in front of you is simply the work that needs to be done. I had cameras. I had footage. I had a private server no one else could access. I had, over 8 years of marriage, built a professional identity, a network, a set of accounts, and 4 years of meticulous financial records entirely under my own name, all of which Marcus had collectively failed to take seriously because he had never taken my work seriously. And I had time. A calm woman with time and documentation is the most underestimated resource I have ever encountered, including in myself. I did not confront him that night. I did not text. I lay in the dark and I began to plan with the same deliberate, methodical stillness that is the truest part of who I have always been. If you are still with this story right now, I want you to stop and drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had to stay completely silent in a moment when every part of you was screaming to speak? Because what came next cost me more controlled silence than I knew I had in me. Share your story below. And if this channel has ever made you feel like someone understood the real weight of quiet, please subscribe. There are more stories coming every week and every single one of them was built the same way. Marcus arrived at the hospital at 10:12 the following morning carrying a dark roast with oat milk from the cafe on Drayton Street. I had mentioned once, 18 months prior, that I liked that particular cafe, and he had apparently filed it away for precisely this kind of occasion. He sat in the chair beside my bed and held my hand and said the surgery had frightened him more than he had shown the previous day. He said he had woken at 2 in the morning and lain there unable to go back to sleep. He said he had kept his phone face up on the nightstand all night in case the nursing staff called. He delivered all of this meeting my eyes with the steady, unhurried confidence of a man whose credibility had never been seriously tested by someone who knew how to keep records. I looked at his face and I thought, you have absolutely no idea. And that thought, which I had expected to carry the weight of grief, felt instead like standing on solid ground after years of walking on something that only felt solid. I was discharged on Thursday the 16th. Marcus drove me home. He made soup from scratch, the butternut squash one I liked in autumn. He set up the sofa with the specific pillow I used when my back was stiff, placing it in exactly the right position without being asked, with what looked for all the world like the natural attentiveness of a man who truly knew his wife. He was warm and present and concerned and careful, and it was the finest performance I had ever watched him deliver, and I studied it with the same observational attention I brought to any complex project in its early assessment phase. I noted everything. I adjusted nothing. Over the 3 weeks that followed, I moved with the focused efficiency of someone who has made a decision and does not require any audience for it. The first thing I did was archive every clip from every camera from the full span of the 14th and 15th of October. I saved the footage to 3 separate external drives. One I stored in the locked bottom drawer of my desk at my design studio on Bull Street, a drawer for which Marcus had never had a key and had never asked for one. The second I mailed inside a padded envelope to my mother Sandra in Portland, Oregon, with a handwritten note asking her to keep it in the small fireproof box she kept under her bed, unopened, until I called. The third, I drove to a First National Bank branch on Broughton Street, a branch I had never used before and that had no connection to any account Marcus was aware of, and placed inside a safety deposit box I opened that morning in my name alone. Then I called Patricia Cheng, not about a design contract this time. Patricia had mentioned to me once, in passing, a family law attorney she occasionally referred professional clients to, a woman named Diane Sorrells who practiced from a second-floor office on Whitaker Street and whose reputation I had spent 2 evenings quietly researching on my laptop in bed while Marcus slept beside me. I found the number I had copied into the back page of a notebook at my studio. I called Diane's office from my personal cell phone at 9 in the morning on October the 20th. From the studio with the door closed, while Marcus was at a site meeting in Beaufort, 45 miles south. I made an appointment for the following afternoon at 2 o'clock. I walked into Diane Sorrell's office on October the 21st carrying a folder that contained the cloud-backed external drive with all 9 camera clips from the night of the 14th. A printed log of every motion alert from September the 23rd through October the 21st. Organized by date, time, and camera position. 8 years of financial records I had accumulated over the preceding 4 years out of a habit of documentation that had no specific named purpose until now. A written summary of the pattern I had observed over the preceding 10 months regarding Sasha Reeves, organized chronologically with dates where I had them. And a separate sheet noting the co-signatory arrangement Marcus had set up on the Habersham Property Trust 3 years into our marriage, which I had identified in a routine review of our estate documents the previous spring and flagged in my notebook without yet understanding its full significance. Diane looked at the folder for a long time before she looked at me. Then she said, "You are more prepared than 90% of the people who sit in this chair." I told her I had always done my homework. She said, "I can see that. We worked through the full picture for 1 hour and 50 minutes. I left with a signed retainer, a detailed documentation checklist, and the name of a forensic financial consultant named Howard Briggs who specialized in marital asset analysis and who Diane described as the most meticulous person she had ever referred anyone to. I met Howard Briggs on October the 28th at a coffee shop on the southern end of Bull Street. He reviewed my financial records for nearly an hour before he spoke. Then he looked up and said, "This is a significant body of evidence." What he had found, running through 7 years of joint account activity, was a consistent pattern of small, COLDA, incremental account movements, reclassifications, timing adjustments, subtle restructurings, that individually would draw no scrutiny and that collectively, analyzed as a sequence, revealed a clear directional intent to position the joint assets in a configuration that would disadvantage me materially in any equitable division. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would have alarmed me on a single statement. Everything that became unambiguous when you laid every statement side by side on a table and followed the direction of the water. I drove home that evening and made dinner. I poured Marcus a glass of water when he came in at 6:40. I listened to him talk about the Beaufort project and asked the right questions at the right intervals, and I felt, through all of it, a calm so complete and so load-bearing that I almost wanted to thank him for teaching me what it felt like to have nothing left to lose inside a marriage. That was the moment I stopped being the woman who doubted her own perceptions and started becoming the woman who held the documentation. Those are 2 fundamentally different states of being. The shift between them is not dramatic, it is very quiet. But it is permanent. Over the following 2.5 weeks, I gathered every document on Diane's checklist. I opened a personal checking account at a bank branch in Bluffton, 30 miles outside Savannah, and began routing my billing income directly there. I reviewed every insurance policy. I met Howard a second time on November the 5th and reviewed his formal written assessment, which was thorough beyond what I had expected, and which Diane had described to me as the kind of document that does not leave room for alternative interpretations. I paid his retainer from the Bluffton account. I said nothing at home about any of it. On the evening of Sunday, November the 2nd, while Marcus was at a firm social event, I had declined citing post-surgical fatigue. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and I reviewed every camera clip from September the 23rd through November the 2nd, 41 days of footage. I was not looking for emotional confirmation. I was looking for a documentable timeline. I found evidence of 6 separate evenings on which Sasha Reeves had been inside my home since the new cameras were installed. 6 evenings in 41 days. Each clip timestamped to the second, geotagged, stored in a cloud archive accessible only from my business account, backed up to 3 physical drives in 3 separate locations. The footage required no interpretation. It told exactly one story, and it told it in 4K resolution. On November the 8th, a Friday morning, Diane filed preliminary divorce documentation with the Chatham County Family Court. The filing date was sealed pending formal service of process. Marcus would receive nothing until I was ready for him to receive it. There was one thing remaining. I needed to speak with his parents, not for their sympathy and not for their alliance, but because Douglas and Nora Whitmore were co-signatories on the Habersham Property Trust, an arrangement Marcus had quietly structured in the 4th year of our marriage. presenting it at the time as routine estate planning, and which Howard and Diane had identified as something requiring resolution before a clean asset division could proceed. I called Nora on the morning of November the 10th. She answered on the second ring. I told her I needed to see her and Douglas in person, that it was important, and that I needed her not to mention the call to Marcus before I arrived. The pause on her end was 4 seconds. Then she said, quietly and with no evasion, "When can you come?" I drove to Raleigh on November the 14th, leaving Savannah at 6 in the morning. Arriving at their home on Glenwood Avenue at 11:15, I sat in the kitchen where Nora had served me sweet tea at 8 Thanksgivings, and I opened my folder on their kitchen table and I told them what I had found. I did not editorialize. I did not reach for their sympathy. I walked them through the facts, in the order in which I had learned them. The camera alerts on the night of October the 14th, the documentation phase, the attorney engagement, Howard's financial assessment, Diane's filing. I showed them the timestamp log. I described the footage accurately and without embellishment. I showed them Howard's summary. Douglas was quiet for the longest interval I had ever heard from him. He was a retired attorney and not a man given to silence. And then he asked, in a careful voice, "How long have you been building this?" I told him the precise dates of each step. Nora had not moved since I began speaking. She kept her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she looked at me with an expression I had only ever seen on people who are watching their understanding of something they believed they knew completely come apart and reform into a different shape. Douglas said, "I know Diane Sorrell's work, she's excellent." I said I agreed. He said he would call his own attorney that afternoon regarding the trust co-signatory. He did. Diane received his attorney's call the following Monday. Nora walked me to my car when I left at 2 in the afternoon. The November air in Raleigh was dry and sharp, and she stood in the driveway in a gray cardigan with her arms folded against the cold, not moving toward the house. She said, "I want to say something before you go." I waited. She said, "My son has always underestimated the wrong things. He has done it his whole life and I should have told him so. I'm sorry I didn't." She said it looking down at the driveway rather than at me. The way people say things that cost them something. I did not offer her the comfort of disagreeing. I said, "Thank you, Nora." I got in my car and I drove back to Savannah. The payoff came on the evening of Saturday, November the 22nd. Marcus had mentioned a dinner party at the home of his colleague Brennan Holt and his wife Genevieve on Jones Street. The kind of gathering Brennan organized 3 or 4 times a year. A dinner for 14 or so guests where the wine was expensive and the conversation was polished, and Marcus was reliably at his most articulate and his most at ease. He liked being seen in that room. He was comfortable there in a way that mattered to him. He had suggested we go together and I had said yes. I had said yes 2 weeks earlier and had not mentioned it again, and had behaved in every way since exactly as I'd behaved before. On the afternoon of the 22nd, I drove to a boutique on Broughton Street and paid cash for a deep navy wool crepe dress with a structured shoulder and a clean, unornamented line. I had identified the dress 3 weeks earlier. I had been waiting. I wore the small gold stud earrings that Nora Whitmore had given me on the morning of our wedding. I did my hair the way I wore it to presentations, pulled back cleanly, nothing dramatic. When I was dressed and standing in front of the mirror in the bedroom of the house on Haversham Street, I looked at myself for a moment, and I thought about all the years of building and keeping and organizing and staying quiet that had brought me to this particular Tuesday evening, and I felt as prepared as I have ever felt for anything in my life. Marcus said I looked beautiful when I came downstairs. I said thank you. I picked up my bag. We drove to Jones Street. There were 14 people at that dinner. Brennan and Genevieve, 2 couples from Southern Tier Associates, Marcus's colleague Davis Reardon and his wife Margot, whom I had always found genuinely warm. 3 people I recognized from previous evenings at that house, and Sasha Reeves. Seated 4 positions to my left around the oval dining table in a forest green wrap dress with a glass of burgundy already in her hand when we walked into the dining room at 7:15 in the Derville. Evening. Marcus saw her from the doorway and did not change his expression by a single fraction. That told me everything about how long and how practiced this had been. Dinner was served at 8 o'clock. The food was exceptional. Genevieve was a deliberate and serious cook. and I ate it without difficulty because I have always been able to eat during the performance of composure. It is something I apparently do well. The conversation ran through the predictable channels: a proposed waterfront development downtown, someone's daughter applying to universities, the bridge renovation project Marcus was overseeing in Beaufort. I participated with complete normalcy. I asked the right questions at the right intervals. I refilled my water glass. Genevieve, who was perceptive in the way of people who watch rooms carefully, glanced at me twice during the first hour with a particular expression: quiet, focused concern. And I gave her the smallest reassuring nod because she had been kind to me for 8 years and she deserved it. And because she had nothing to do with any of this. At 8:49, Brennan stood to deliver a toast. He spoke warmly about the firm's strong fourth quarter, about the Beaufort project specifically, about Marcus's leadership on it. He raised his glass. 12 people around the table raised their glasses. Marcus put his right hand briefly over his heart, the specific gesture he used when performing modesty in a room full of people he wanted to impress. I raised my glass with everyone else. I smiled. I drank. Then I set my glass down on the white tablecloth and I said, clearly and without raising my voice, "I hope no one minds if I add something." Brennan looked at me. He said, "Of course, please." I did not stand. I stayed in my seat. I looked at the table generally, including everyone and fixing on no one specific. And I said, "I want everyone here to know that I filed for divorce from Marcus." The filing was dated November the 8th. He'll be formally served through Diane Sorrell's office on Monday morning. I'm mentioning it in this room because most of you are colleagues and friends of ours and would hear about it in time, and I have always believed that the honest path is the more graceful one. I am grateful to Brennan and Genevieve for their friendship over these years, and I intend to keep it. I reached for my napkin. I folded it once, deliberately, as I always fold things. I placed it beside my plate. I picked up my bag from where it rested against my right ankle. And I looked at Marcus directly, for the first and only time that evening. I said, "I hope you both have a lovely rest of the night." The room was completely silent. I stood. I walked toward the doorway into the hall. Genevieve met me there and closed both her hands around my arm for 1 second without saying anything, and I covered her hands with mine for 1 second. And then I walked through the foyer and out the front door of the house on Jones Street and into the cool, salt-threaded November air of Savannah, Georgia. I got into my car. I drove home on streets I knew completely, with the passenger window cracked 2 inches because the air in this city at this time of year is one of the most beautiful things I have ever known, and I was not going to miss it. I did not look in the rearview mirror once. There was nothing behind me worth looking at. Marcus came home at 11:36. I was in bed, not asleep. He sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark and said my name. I did not respond. He said my name again. I said nothing. He said, "Clara, we need to talk about this." I said, "It's late, Marcus. There's nothing to talk about tonight," he said. "You blindsided me in front of everyone I work with." I looked at the ceiling, where the light from the street lantern outside made a pale rectangle through the curtain gap. I said, "I was in a hospital bed when you were pouring wine for her in our kitchen and telling her I probably wouldn't be home until Thursday. I think we have different definitions of blindside." The silence that followed was the longest I had ever heard him maintain. Then he said, in a voice that was quieter than I had ever heard from him, smaller, without any of its usual architecture. "What do you actually want?" I said. "The house. Full equitable division of assets per Diane's filing, and the co-signatory on the Habersham Property Trust released by the end of the month. Your father is already working on it." He made a sound. Not a word. The particular sound. Then he said very quietly, "I could explain about Sasha, if you would let me." I said, "I have 41 days of continuous footage from 4 cameras in 4K resolution. There is nothing to explain to me, Marcus." I reached over and turned off the lamp on my side of the bed. He sat in the dark of our bedroom for a while. Then I heard him stand. I heard his footsteps move down the hall. I heard the door to the guest room close, softly and with great care, as though he were trying not to wake someone. That was the most controlled thing I had ever seen him do, and it came 11 years too late. In the weeks that followed, more than one person told me I should be angrier. I understood what they were reaching for, but I could not locate the anger they were expecting. Nora called on November the 25th. She was not calling to defend him, she was calling to check on me. She said, "I keep going back to that dinner. I keep thinking about how still you were." I told her that calm was not the absence of something. Calm was the presence of something that had been built, carefully and over a long time. From the material of every year I had spent being dismissed and still showing up and still doing the work, and still keeping the records even when I had not yet understood precisely what they were for. She was quiet for long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then she said, "I'm glad he married you, Clara. I wish he had understood what it meant." It was the most honest and the saddest thing she had said to me in 11 years of knowing her. I thanked her and I meant it. Diane finalized the settlement terms in the second week of January. I kept the house on Habersham Street. Not only because of what it was worth, though it had appreciated considerably in the 8 years since we had bought it. I kept it because I had spent 8 years designing every room of it, specifying every material and every light source and every proportion. And because the idea of being displaced from my own work by a man who had spent that same time calling it a decorating thing was not one I was willing to accommodate. Marcus moved to a furnished rental on Gwinnett Street in early February. He did not contest the division in any meaningful way. I think, in the end, he understood what it meant to be on the wrong side of documentation this thorough. The property trust co-signatory was released on November the 29th, one day before my stated deadline. I removed the interior cameras the day Marcus carried the last box to his car. I set the system back to entry point monitoring only. I did not need to watch the inside of my own house anymore. There was nothing in it I hadn't already accounted for. I have thought a great deal about what this story is actually about. When people hear it, they focus on the cameras, on the footage, on the hospital room, on the phone lighting up. That is not what the story is about to me. The cameras were 21 days old. The story is what existed before them. The 4 years of financial records I had kept out of a habit of thoroughness that predated any specific suspicion. The professional identity I had maintained under my own name with my own accounts and my own clients, even when the person sleeping beside me referred to it as puttering. The attorney whose name I had written in a back-page notebook without any clearly defined purpose for that information at the time. All of it was preparation for a moment I had not yet defined, built from a way of living rather than from a plan. And when the moment came, everything I needed was already in place. If you are somewhere in your life right now where you feel overlooked, where your work is the thing someone waves away with a flick of the wrist, where your perceptions are consistently reframed by the person who should know you best, I want to tell you something I believe completely. Start keeping records. Not because you are preparing for a confrontation, but because a woman who has documented her own work and maintained her own accounts and built something real under her own name will always have a place to stand. And a woman with a place to stand is a woman who can afford to be calm. Who can afford to wait? Who can afford to walk out of a dinner on Jones Street in a navy dress without looking back once, because she has already done everything that needed doing, in silence, long before that room went quiet? What would you have done? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. And one more question before I go. What are you building quietly right now, in your own life, that no one around you knows about yet? I want to hear it. Thank you. From every corner of this channel, from everyone who works here and believes in why these stories deserve to be told. Thank you for spending this hour with Clara's story today. We built this channel for the woman who has never needed to be the loudest person in the room. The woman who has always known that the most durable things are built slowly, in silence from the inside out. If today's story stayed with you, please leave a like. It takes 1 second and it puts this story in front of another woman who might need it exactly right now. Subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. And share this with someone in your life who is currently in her own silent building phase and needs to know that the foundation she is laying will hold. You are seen. The quietest comebacks have always been the ones worth waiting for. We will see you next week.